Good afternoon, fifth graders. I'm here today reporting to you from my front yard because it's such a beautiful day and we need to get outside and get some sunshine. Today we are reading chapter 6 of Pillage Ober Sky. Excerpt from section 3 of the Green Got Not, as recorded by Daniel Phillips. After 3 months of dwelling on the Isles of Maine, Edward and Bruno received a visitor, an old peddler who was making his way across the isle. He was a magician and offered to sell them magic in exchange for something to eat. Though the peddler was very hungry, Edward, cruel as ever, gave the peddler a stone to eat. Chapter 6, Headmaster Routine. I couldn't remember falling asleep, but I was painfully aware of waking up. The stupid bell on my wall rang and rang until I got up and yanked on the rope next to it. "I'm up!" I screamed to nobody. My eyelids felt like sticky pieces of clay that I had to struggle to pull open. A wet gray light dripped through the windows and spotted the floor of my room. For the first time in my life, I wished I had a vase full of flowers or a colorful painting to break up the bleh. I walked to the front window and looked down to see Thomas talking to a short, stocky man with thick black beard and wiry hair. The stocky man held a rake in his gloved hands. They were talking calmly, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. I left the window and grabbed some clothes to wear. All I really had were t-shirts and jeans, so I grabbed a green t-shirt and blue jeans and darted across the hallway to the bathroom. A pile of thick, soft towels were stacked near the sink. There was also a new bar of soap and a bottle of shampoo sitting on the shower rack. Near the sink was a small bottle of tooth powder. "Tooth powder?" I said, confused. I got out my toothbrush and dumped a big shake of tooth powder on the bristles. It was one of the single worst teeth brushings I had ever endured. My mouth foamed up like a rabid dog's. I showered, got dressed, and then made my way downstairs. Miley was in the kitchen talking to Wayne. "Good morning," Wayne said, her short hair damp from being outdoors. "Morning," I replied. "I hope you like eggs," Miley said. "We've chickens, and they won't stop producing." "I like eggs," I said, wishing my stomach wasn't as nervous as it was. Wayne smiled. "Was everything all right with your room?" she asked. "Yes," I answered, "although I'm not sure I like tooth powder." "Thomas bought you tooth powder?" Wayne asked with surprise. "Miley?" "Don't look at me," she said. "Thomas thought that was what kids liked." "In the 1920s, Wayne said, shaking her head. "I'll get you some real toothpaste," she said to me. "Thanks. So what time does school start?" I asked. "The bus comes in 20 minutes, Miley said. "Bus? I thought Thomas was taking me." "Turns out a bus comes this far," Miley shrugged. "But it's my first day," I said, knowing that I had handled more than my fair share of first days alone. "Your taking the bus will save Thomas a number of hours," Wayne said. "Oh, good," I replied sarcastically, wondering what Thomas would do with all the extra time. Maybe he would clean his ears or work on his stiff posture. The breakfast Miley made was delicious. I had 2 biscuits the size of soccer balls smothered in thick white gravy with large bits of sausage. Miley had also made me 2 scrambled eggs that were fluffier and tastier than any eggs I had ever eaten before. I dipped bits of egg in the gravy and then put spoonfuls of hash browns and gravy eggs into slices of soft toasted bread. "You're a great cook," I said with a full mouth. Miley liked that, scooping more gravy onto my plate. "I used to cook for many people every meal," she bragged. "Where?" I asked. Miley looked at Wayne and then back at me. "Here," she said. "So a lot of people lived here?" "Most lived and worked here," Miley said. but it's expensive to keep a full staff employed. Now, finish up. After breakfast, Thomas drove me to the end of our driveway to wait for the bus. I could have walked it, but Thomas felt the exertion would make me too tired to study properly. I hated to inform him that I most likely wouldn't study properly anyway, but I wanted the ride, so I kept quiet. Outside the manor's gate, Thomas stopped and pointed out the spot where I should wait. The bus will be here in a couple of minutes. Is there anyone at the school I should talk to first? I asked. They know you're coming. I got out of the car and Thomas rolled down his window. A few people may talk, he said, but you are a Phillips and you should be above it all. Don't pay their words much mind. Okay, I said, confused. What? Thomas rolled up his window, turned the car around, and drove back to the mansion. Have a nice day, I said sarcastically. The air was still gray and wet, but there were bits of blue sky in the far distance. From my vantage point, I could see the entire Hagen Valley. The town looked like small black and white bits stitched into a fuzzy blanket of green. There were a couple of church spires, and I could see the train track running between the mountains. The rays of sunlight pushed down in tight, bright streams. I wished I was standing beneath one of the rays. I loved the beautiful woods and mountains, but I missed the familiarity of the west and the large buckets of sunshine. I heard the bus engine coughing like a plane struggling to take off. I couldn't actually see it until it turned the last bend and pulled into view. The bus stopped directly in front of me, its exhaust pipe belching out smoke. The door opened, and a fat woman who was squeezed in behind the steering wheel smiled at me. Come on, she waved. We've got a schedule. Welcome. Thanks, I said, stepping up. The driver took out a clipboard and looked at the spreadsheet on it. Beck Phillips? She asked. Yes. Take any seat you wish. There were only 2 other kids on the bus. One was Milo, and across the aisle from him was Kate. She wore her long red hair tied back with a black ribbon. Her blue eyes were big and sparkled under the dull of light day. It wasn't exactly how I had imagined running into her, but I decided to go with it. Hey, Kate, I said nicely as I walked toward them both in the back. I kept my arms hanging by my side in case she decided to stand up and hug me. Well, if it isn't Nancy Drew, she smiled. This was not as going as I had foolishly dreamed. I thought about jumping out of the bus window. You know her? Milo asked me. We met on the train, Kate answered coolly. He was investigating the case of the missing passengers. Missing passengers? Milo asked. Don't ask, Kate waved. Well, it's nice to see you too, I said, taking the seat next to Milo. I didn't realize you were one of them, she said. One of them? I asked. Kate shrugged, bored. My family isn't exactly big on your family, she finally answered. What's wrong with my family? I questioned. I mean, I still haven't met my uncle. He squelched on a deal, Kate said. He sold my father a big chunk of land and a lodge and then took back more than half of the land. I'm surprised he let us keep the lodge. Sorry, I tried. The bus stopped and 2 more kids got on. Both of the boys waved at Kate and then sat down a few rows up from us. At the next stop, a girl about Kate's age with none of Kate's beauty got on the bus. Nervous? Milo asked me. A bit, I said. Don't be. I've only been here a short while myself, and it's not too bad, Milo said. Are you a good student? Depends. Milo liked that, laughing harder than I thought necessary, and hitting me on the shoulder. Kate simply stared out the window. It was a pose I had seen her execute many times on the train. The bus wound down through the tunnels, filling up with students of all shapes and sizes, and eventually pulling into the town of King's Flat. I was happy to have a seat near Milo, and at least know someone. The bus passed through a large brick gateway and circled around a roundabout. We veered to the right, coming up to a stop in front of a large, ornate building. The school looked older than time and was made of at least 1 million square stones. Over the front door were 2 smiling gargoyles and a couple of words in Latin. What do the words mean? I asked Milo, pointing. Who knows, he answered. Prepare to be bored. Education hurts. What's the deal with all the gargoyles around here? Adds character, Milo said. Now follow me. You'll be in my rotation of classes. I followed Milo, looking at all the other kids. We walked across an enormous brick courtyard and through the side doors. Everyone looked like they had just stumbled out of a Gap ad. Out of a Gap ad. Nobody smiled at me. I wore a sneer and tried to fit in as best as possible. A number of male students wore suit jackets, and all the girls wear skirts. Is there a dress code? I asked Milo, realizing that he too had on a blazer. Yes, he replied. Great. Thomas gets me tooth powder, but forgets this? I'm sure they'll let you slide, seeing how it's your first day. The inside of the school was stone with large banners stretched across the walls and lights that hung down from the center of the ceiling. All the windows were up above the lockers that had obviously been installed many years after the original building had been built. Outside the high windows, I could see gray sky and persistent ivy that clung to the building. Come on, Milo said, his long arm waving at me to move faster. I bumped shoulders with a number of students in the hall. I was happy that everyone looked about my height or shorter. I towered over quite a few of the younger kids. In here, Milo called. I followed Milo into a large classroom with 10 rows of stadium-style seats with 10 seats across each row. At the front of the room was an old desk with a blackboard standing behind it. The ceiling was high, and thin windows located around the room's ceiling made it feel like a cave with skylights. Students flowed in like reluctant sludge. There was their body language making it clear that most of them did not want to be here. In a few minutes, the seats were filled and the shrill bell rang. I sat down next to Milo, hoping not to stand out. A bitter-looking man with thick hair and an uptight walk stepped stiffly into the front room. He wore high-buttoned shirt with thin tie and tweaked jacket. The creases on his pants were as straight and ridged as I figured his personality must be. He had bushy eyebrows and a small button nose that was slightly off-center of his face. One of his eyebrows was higher than the other, giving him a constant look of suspicion. He looked familiar to me somehow. He held up his right hand and the class quieted. He then put his attaché case on the desk and pulled out a thin notebook. He flipped it open, sniffed loud enough for all of us to hear, and then wrote the word fortune on the blackboard. When he turned his attention back to the class, he noticed me. I might have been imagining, but I could have sworn I saw the color drain from his face. You, he said, 5th row, and apparently above our dress code. I squirmed in my seat. He's new, Mr. Squall, Milo said. Funny, he said. He looks at least 15 years worn. Most of the class laughed politely. A stocky kid with long black hair yelled, Newbie! Stand and tell us who you are, Mr. Squall insisted, making no effort to stop the taunting. I stood and felt every eye fall on me. I'm Beck Phillips, I said. I just moved here. Phillips? He asked, surprised. There was a long, awkward pause before he continued. As in Aaron Phillips? I nodded. Impossible, he whispered. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like there was steam coming out of his ears. Did no one mention the dress code? He finally hissed. I shook my head. Ignorance is a sorry excuse. Come. Mr. Squall beckoned me toward him impatiently. I moved out of my aisle and down the steps to his desk. He pulled a large wad of wrinkled fabric from his bottom desk drawer. He shook it out with one hand, revealing its true form, a long blue sports coat. Let's have you wear this. Excuse me? The class laughed impolitely. This is the coat of justice, he said smartly, as if he had created something dazingly clever. It helps remind those who need reminding that Colobar is a school of organization and obedience. I expect you to wear this coat until you have a proper substitution. I took the jacket from him and turned it around. It was wrinkled and filthy and had obviously not been laundered in years. Really? I asked. The class snickered. The dark-haired kid said something about owning a jacket just like that before his father had a job. Mr. Squall shook his head as seriously as if it were an inquisition and a person's life was in the balance. The jacket, he insisted. I put the jacket on. It was at least 5 sizes too big for me. I couldn't imagine it fitting anyone in Colobars properly. It smelt like the back of an old apartment complex on a trash day. Have a seat, Mr. Squall said. Tick-tock, we're wasting precious time. I sat down while he gave the rest of the class a brief bio of me. Mr. Phillips here is related to Aaron Phillips, he said bitterly. Aaron currently owns the monstrous and ill-kept estate at the top of the mountains. I say currently because if what I hear is true, Aaron is having financial difficulties. It'd be a pity for him to lose the mansion, seeing how the Phillips ancestors founded this valley. But mismanagement and dementia are a terrible combination. Hard to balance the books with a half-rotten brain. I personally have never met a man more anxious to meddle in other people's affairs. I had no idea what Mr. Squall was talking about. My only hope was that none of the other students understood him either. Now, to the lesson at hand, he continued. Mr. Squall turned and circled the word fortune on the chalkboard. He then spent the next hour telling us how too much money made people evil and how greed was a more powerful force than love. He used my uncle and his mistakes as the bad example as often as he could. By the time class was over, I felt as if I had been emotionally beat up. Nice guy, I said to Milo once we were in the hall. Yeah, he's a real horse's... Milo stopped talking. A small cluster of boys was blocking the hallway. A boy at the front of the crowd was the same black-haired boy who taunted me in class. Hey, Bland, he mocked, making fun of Milo's last name. It's Flan, Wyatt, Milo replied. Not from where I'm standing, he said. He laughed. So the new kid isn't the newest kid anymore. You got yourself a little friend. Milo was silent. I sighed, realizing that Milo was indeed one of those kids who was easy to pick on. I stepped in front of Milo and motioned as if to move through the roadblock. I had dealt with plenty of bullies in my life, and I wasn't about to give this kid the satisfaction of bothering me. Ladies, I said sarcastically, trying to get past. Excuse me. Wyatt snipped. Come on, Milo, I said casually. We've got to go. So, Beck, Wyatt sneered. How's your daft uncle? I decided to at least give the silent treatment a try. Wyatt, on the other hand, wouldn't hear of it. Is it true, Beck? He asked cruelly. Yes, I replied seriously, having quickly realized that silence wasn't going to work. It's true. Apparently garbage does have more personality than you. But don't freak out. You beat the garbage soundly in the stench department. Wyatt looked both confused and upset. Listen, Beck, he said, poking me in the chest. My father has more money than your entire family combined. Tell him congratulations for me, I said cheerfully, slapping Wyatt on the shoulder. Milo stepped back. I could see he was scared, but there was also a look of admiration in his eyes. I liked it. There weren't too many moments in my life I had been admired. I suppose I should have shown more restraint or just kept my mouth closed, but my personality had never stood for it. I remember being a 9-year-old kid and telling off some teenager who was picking on another teenager. I had a poor sense of how scared I really should be when dealing with other people. How's your mother? Wyatt asked cruelly. I gazed at him. I could feel redness trying to creep up in my neck. I fought the pigment in my own skin and took a long, soft breath. She's dead, I said confidently. But I have a feeling you knew that. Oh, and my father left us when I was 1 or 2. Hard to say for sure exactly when he left, seeing as I was so young and my mother was kind of, what's the word you used? Daft. I had always found the truth to be much more effective than trying to hide from what I was. I was not about to give Wyatt more ammo to use against me. Are you crazy? He asked, confused. I stepped up to Wyatt and looked him in his pale green eyes. He stared back at me, finally noticing the couple of inches I had on him. Whatever, he said. This school used to have standards. I was going to say something clever, but Milo grabbed my wrist as if to inform me of the benefits of letting things go. Nice to meet you, Wyatt, I smiled insincerely, turning away from him. Wait, Wyatt said. I'm not done talking to you. I turned to look at him, happy that he wasn't aware of the benefits of letting things go. I was in the mood for a little excitement. I had never done well at school, and most of that was because trouble found me at every turn. Now, here I was on my first day of another new school, and already I had made an enemy. I was almost happy at the prospect of getting my hands dirty. We're not done? I asked, surprised. I thought you had used up the extent of your vocabulary. Wyatt didn't scare me. He was shorter, and despite the few extra pounds around his waist, I had a feeling I could take him easily. Unfortunately for me, Wyatt realized that as well. Ellis Carl, he said, red-faced. Beck here wants to get through. Wyatt stepped to the side, and his 2 taller and bigger friends moved forward. Ellis towered 4 inches above me and had a single eyebrow that stretched across his face and into his sideburns. Carl was my height, with blonde hair and crooked nose that had probably been shaped by fighting. Listen, I said reasonably, not wanting Milo to get hurt. We're just trying to walk down the hall. There was a nice-sized gathering of students surrounding us. Most of them had stopped by, hoping for a good fight. Be my guest, Ellis said, thumping me on the chest with his large rubbery hands. Carl shoved Milo. I shoved Carl and was preparing to barrel into the dumb thug when I noticed the ivy pushing through the windows above us. The green leaf swung down and drooped like a web right above Wyatt, Ellis, and Carl. Wyatt raised an arm, preparing to take a swing at Milo, but was stopped by a shot of ivy that wrapped tightly around his wrist. What the? Wyatt started to say. I stepped back, not understanding what was going on. I knew my life had taken a turn for the weird, but this was 3 steps beyond weird. Large tendrils of ivy draped over all 3 of them. They pushed and pulled at the growth, but it was useless. Some ivy grabbed Ellis by the ankles and yanked him upside down. The fearful faces of the crowd of onlookers told me quite clearly that the ramping ivy was not something that normally happened at Colwarborough. Wyatt began to scream like the class full of home economic girls I had once dropped in on. Everyone stepped back in amazement and fear. The ivy jerked all 3 boys off the ground and, with a steady speed, pulled them up to the ceiling and out of the high windows. We could hear all 3 of them screaming and crying as they disappeared into the great outdoors. Just like that, they were gone. Mr. Squall stepped out of his classroom, demanding to know what all the noise was about. We all stood there like frightened mice, most of the girls twisting their hands nervously. A few kids pointed up, but couldn't find the words to explain what had happened. What's going on? Squall barked. Some kids sort of climbed out the window, I managed to say. Squall looked at me and sneered. Do you think I'm thick? He said, looking to give Aaron something to laugh about. Now stop making excuses and get to class. The group disappeared slowly. Milo and I made our way to the next class in silence. Our English teacher was a squat woman with long head and bristle-short hair. She wore dark navy dress that was too long for her. High on the chalkboard's right corner, the name Professor Pfitzer was written in blue chalk. "What was all that?" I asked as I took a seat next to Milo. "I have no idea," Milo whispered excitedly. "Do plants usually do that here?" Milo shrugged. "I haven't been here that long, so maybe, but I've never seen something like that before." Milo shook his head in disbelief. "Should we tell someone about Wyatt?" he asked. "They could be hurt." His concern for Wyatt and his friends ended as quickly as it had begun. At that moment, Wyatt, Ellis, and Carl walked into the class, late and covered with dirt and leaves. "A minute late is still late," Professor Pfitzer scolded. "And the reason for your tardiness?" Wyatt looked around. No one would make eye contact with him except me. "We fell into the bushes," he lied angrily, his gaze locked with mine. "And there was a bunch of spiders in the ivy." Ellis shivered. "Sit," Professor Pfitzer said impatiently. They sat, and the rest of the day transpired in a rather normal fashion, although, to be honest, I could not, no matter how I tried, get out of my mind the image of that ivy sneaking through the window and snatching Wyatt and his friends. There was something significantly different about the town of King's Plot. Okay, friends, we're going to stop there, and we will read the next chapter tomorrow. See you then.